The risk of getting a tick bite from a deer tick is pretty much in any county in Wisconsin.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Wisconsin's Outdoor Explorer podcast. I am your host Jason, and I am really excited about this week's interview. We are talking ticks with Rebecca Osborn from the Wisconsin Department of Health Services. She gives us a lot of great information about ticks and what to watch for and how to prevent them. And because tick season has started, that it's really important for us to understand ticks a little better and make sure that we're ready before we head outdoors. So because this is a little bit longer episode, we're going to jump right into the interview here with Rebecca Osborn from the Wisconsin Department of Health Services. I am joined today by Rebecca from the Wisconsin Department of Health Services, and we are talking ticks today. Welcome to the podcast, Rebecca.
Thank you.
I was on Facebook this morning and I was looking through some pictures and stuff, and someone posted today about tick season beginning. He showed his pant leg and he had like 8 ticks on his pant leg. So my first question is, when does tick season officially start?
That's a good question. And it can really vary from year to year. There's sort of no magic date. You know, the ticks aren't aware of our calendars, but essentially they are not active in the winter when temperatures are below freezing. But really once the temperatures get above freezing and sort of remain above freezing, so even in the 40s and 50s days like today, the ticks will start to emerge. So this is certainly the time to start looking. I think I even heard someone mention they saw a tick back in late March. So it's possible to see them this early in the spring.
Now, we had, the extreme snowfall here in February and then the extreme cold before that. Does that affect the tick population?
Yeah, it can. And not always in the same ways, interestingly. So really severe cold temperatures certainly can impact the ability for ticks to overwinter and survive in our state. So in some ways, when it's freezing cold outside and, you're worried about your pipes bursting, at least you can be thankful that maybe this is killing some ticks. However, snowfall or having snow cover can actually serve as an insulator, and so it can actually protect ticks from those really cold temperatures. So if it's dry and cold, that certainly is a combination that can affect tick populations. Otherwise, snow cover can actually protect them from cold temperatures. So it just depends on, a variety of factors.
So where do they hibernate or live during the winter months?
Sure. So a lot of times they just look for spaces under leaf litter. Tick habitat is they really rely on wooded areas where they have a lot of leaf litter and cover to protect themselves. They're very sensitive to humidity and can dry out really easily, and also these cold temperatures in the winter. So they just sort of bury under some leaf litter, maybe under a little bit of soil, in fact, and then they can, provide some insulation from those cold temperatures. They remain, inactive all through the fall and winter, and then once again, when the temperatures start to rise above freezing, that's their cue to start, looking for a new blood meal.
So where are we likely to find ticks? So there sounds like they're kind of on the ground, basically, in the wintertime. Do they migrate up, or how do they? Where are we going to find them if we see them?
There's a lot of misinformation out there about ticks climbing up high on trees and maybe jumping down onto your head, and that's definitely incorrect. The place where ticks travel mostly is on the ground or on sort of low vegetation. So really small ticks, the ones that emerge newly from eggs, the youngest ones, which are called larvae ticks, they tend to stay really close to the ground and look for hosts. So that's the animals where they're going to parasitize and take a blood meal from. They look for really small mammals or birds that spend a lot of time on the ground, so mice and voles and whatnot. As the ticks get older and change into one of the older life phases, they may start to climb up some of the vegetation and essentially start questing or, waiting around for animals or people or really anyone to walk by and grab onto and then look for a good spot to take a blood meal. So really the places you're going to find them when you're out and about in the state are, kind of at that ankle, knee, maybe at the very highest, sort of the hip level when you're walking around. And so you need to make sure to keep an eye out for ticks sort of coming from the ground up. They're not going to jump down on you from above your head.
How many varieties of ticks do we have here in Wisconsin?
Yeah, so there's quite a few numbers of species of ticks. However, some of them really don't bite people. Some of them evolve to really only prefer a certain species of animal. So not all ticks will bite people. The ones that we consider most relevant or most important for human health are really 3 different species. The one that we probably will talk most about today is the black-legged tick, also called the deer tick. That one is the carrier of the bacteria that causes Lyme disease and multiple other diseases that can cause illness in people. There's also another really common tick called the wood tick or the dog tick. This one is less likely to spread illness, but it's still a really common tick, so people might see it not only on themselves but on their dogs. It's also really common for dogs to pick those up. And then a third one, which is much more rare, and it's kind of emerging slowly into our state from the south, is called the Lone Star tick, and that tick can also spread disease. Again, it's not often seen, but it has been documented in the state, and we're keeping an eye out on it since it appears to be moving its range more northward towards Wisconsin.
Out of those 3, which one, in your opinion, is the most dangerous to humans?
Oh, sure. By far, it's the black-legged tick or the deer tick. So we can talk about this tick from now on as the deer tick. It's the most common name used for this particular tick. And again, this is the one that spreads Lyme disease. It can also spread an illness called anaplasmosis or ehrlichiosis. It can spread Powassan virus. It's definitely the one that we care the most about in terms of spreading diseases in human health.
Now, you talk about bite. What does a tick do when we say that it bites somebody or bites something?
So ticks essentially are looking for an easy source of blood, and they need to extract that blood over a long period of time. So essentially, when they find a suitable spot, they sort of pierce through the skin and they inject an anesthetic, in fact, so that you can't feel pain. And so they're also secreting some substances that act as a cement, so that once they get their long mouth parts into somebody's skin, it's a pretty solid location where they can't sort of easily be pulled off. So if you were to look at a tick under a microscope, they have these really long mouth parts that have very jagged edges that serve to not only kind of break through the skin, but then help to keep their mouth parts anchored in there. A lot of ticks will spend several days attached to somebody while they're slowly collecting a sufficient blood meal that will sustain them. So they sort of go through these cycles of secreting some fluids into somebody's skin and then also collecting the blood. And that's oftentimes, through this process is how the pathogens can be transmitted to people. It can take some time after the tick is attached for a bacteria, for example, to be transmitted to the host. So it's not a pleasant thought.
No.
But they're pretty fascinating creatures that have obviously spent a lot of their evolutionary time really perfecting this ability to bite, and have it go unnoticed, and then also to be really hard to remove that tick once it's really in there.
So where are going to be some common places that you're going to find ticks on yourself if you're out in the woods? Because I think most of the time you're going to feel them crawling before anything. I mean, that's the way I usually find them. You'll feel them crawling up your leg or up your arm or something, and you look down and there's a tick. So where are they going that they really want to get to?
Yeah, so again, they're looking for easy access here. So a lot of times they're looking for locations that have, minimal hair, where the blood, there's a lot of capillaries or blood supply that's very close to the skin. So places that are common to find ticks are around your ears, the back of your head or neck, Also, locations kind of on the back of your leg, they tend to sometimes congregate around tighter clothing, so maybe under like a waistband or a strap that you might have on your clothing. They can also be kind of hidden in armpits or other places that are hard to find. So it's really important to do a really thorough tick check, after you are outdoors, and especially in wooded areas where you could have picked up a tick, to look in, every spot on your body that, where they could have found a good place to bite you. So oftentimes we recommend that people, do a good tick check as well as they can on themselves, and then ask a friend or a family member to check those areas where they can't see, back of the head, through the hair, on the back, places like that.
Now, let's say you've been bitten by one. Now, are there going to be any symptoms that you're gonna notice, or anything that's going to give you any indication that you've been bitten?
It can, yeah. So the bite itself can cause some irritation that can cause kind of a red mark around the area of the bite. Sometimes people who are aware of the bullseye rash that can develop once a person is infected with Lyme disease might think that is actually a rash. And it certainly can be in some instances, but oftentimes people might notice a red area around the bite, and that could just be irritation from the skin. And so that's not necessarily an immediate cause for concern for something like Lyme disease. But again, it takes some time for the tick to transmit the bacteria that causes Lyme disease. So if you know for certain that the tick hasn't been attached to you very long, there's a pretty low risk of contracting any disease. However, a lot of times people just don't know how long the tick's been attached, and so we always recommend once somebody finds a tick on them, or even if they've just been in tick habitat and weren't aware of a tick bite, if they develop things like a fever or a rash, especially that classical bullseye rash, body aches or joint pains, things like that, to certainly consider maybe this is a tick-borne illness and to go talk to their doctor. But again, the tick bite itself is not usually, in and of itself is not a cause for concern. It's mostly the diseases that they could spread through the tick saliva.
So you're not saying if you do find that you've been bitten, you don't need to rush to a doctor right away. You probably get it out and maybe just see what happens a few days later.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great way of clarifying kind of what to look for. So you kind of hit it on the head that the tick bite itself is no cause for alarm. Of course, we want to avoid them, and they're not, they're pretty unpleasant. But right. One thing to remember is not all ticks are carrying diseases, and even if the tick does have a pathogen, they may not have had the time to transmit it to you. So there's no reason to rush to your doctor if you've gotten a tick bite. It's sometimes helpful to save the tick. What we recommend often is to pull the tick off of you and put it in a plastic baggie and label it with the date, and maybe an activity or two that you had recently done where you may have picked up the tick, especially if it was sort of a unique activity. And then you can save it in case any symptoms were to develop, and that can be helpful for a physician or someone else to identify the tick species for you, so you might know which disease the tick might be carrying. So we often get questions about, well, I just got bitten by a tick, or my kid got bitten by a tick. Should I start taking, antibiotics? Should I go see the doctor? And I can totally understand people's concerns. Mm-hmm. But before any symptoms develop, we really don't recommend doing anything about it except to just be aware of the tick bite and keep an eye out for any symptoms that may develop. And that incubation period, so the time that symptoms may develop, is a really wide range. It can anywhere from about 3 days after the tick bite to 30 days. So it can take up to a month for symptoms to develop in a person. So if you get a tick bite, even a month later, start to get sick with a fever or a rash, that still could mean it's a tick-borne illness. So it's important to mention that if you do see a doctor.
What is the best way to remove it? I've heard you can use rubbing alcohol, you can just pull them out with the tweezers. What's the best way to remove the tick?
Yeah, thank you for asking that, because this one, we always want to try and provide some really useful, important advice, which is the best way to remove a tick that's embedded in you is to just use tweezers. The fine tip tweezers are ideal, but any pair of tweezers, you grasp the tick as close to your skin as possible and just pull it out straight and steadily, and it should come out. There's a lot of, again, some misinformation that's gone around about how to remove a tick. You mentioned one, using rubbing alcohol. I've heard some other ones about using certain types of oils. Of course, there's also the light a match and burn the tick. None of those have been shown to be effective. And really what we're going for here is we want the tick to be removed as quickly as possible. So waiting for the tick to come out on its own or trying to stimulate it to come out of it on its own is not the most, is not the best approach. And some of these methods can actually increase your chance of getting a tick-borne disease because the tick may excrete more saliva upon irritation. Things like burning the tick might actually cause the tick to, essentially give you a really high dose of potentially infectious substances that could, increase your chance of getting, a disease. So, again, just those tweezers. If you happen to be out, on a trail or recreating, and you don't happen to have tweezers, you can use your fingers. But we do recommend that people try, not to squeeze the tick so hard that it bursts, or don't try and mash it up with your fingers. Just pull it out. And again, you can save it in a plastic baggie, for later in case symptoms were to develop.
Well, it sounds like that's something that should be in everybody's pocket, at least during tick season now, is just carry a tweezers with you so that you've got the right tool to do the job, basically. Yeah,
absolutely. We recommend that, you could even make a little tick bite kit, which, could include tweezers, maybe a small, Ziploc baggie or two. We also recommend using an alcohol wipe after you remove the tick at the bite site, again, just to clean that area. So you can throw those things in a little bag or a pouch or something and carry those with you everywhere you go, and you should have a quick little set of tools in case you find a tick on your body.
Now, if you find a tick that hasn't bitten you yet and is just still crawling on you, what's a good way to dispose of that?
Ticks are pretty hardy, and again, you can't really smash them in your fingers, nor do we recommend that.
Right.
So oftentimes, if I'm just out, in nature, I often don't feel like I have the right tools to actually kill the tick, so I may just sort of flick it away from me and make sure it's far away from my body and everyone else I'm with, back into the brush. However, that's not ideal. Especially if you're in your home, we want to make sure that these ticks are being killed so they're not crawling around, potentially biting someone else. So in that case, we usually recommend putting it in a plastic baggie. You can throw it away at that point. Or, one thing to do is you can, if you really want to, you can put it in some alcohol, like some rubbing alcohol, and that would kill it. If you want to save it, just putting it in that plastic baggie is fine, and making sure it's in a safe place so nobody can get into it should be okay. And then, the tick will eventually die.
Let's talk prevention here a little bit. What can I do as a hiker or somebody who's just out and about do to protect myself and help prevent getting a tick bite?
Yeah, that's sort of the important messages we like to get out, because we love our beautiful state of Wisconsin, having so many wonderful opportunities to recreate and enjoy the outdoors, and we certainly recommend that people keep doing that. What I always think of for a day when I'm going out hiking, for example, is sort of 3 stages. There's always the before you go out, while you're out, and then when you get home. So the things you can do in advance are what you wear. So some things to consider are, trying to cover your exposed skin. So we recommend, even when it's hot, this can be hard, but trying to wear long sleeves and long pants. This can avoid, ticks just having access to your skin. If you can, go ahead and tuck your pants into your socks, and your shirt should be tucked into your pants. That way when ticks are crawling sort of from the ground up, makes it difficult for them to access, your body under your clothing. Wearing light-colored clothing, like whites or something, light in color, can help you see the tick better if it happens to get on your clothes. And then there's also the repellents. Of course, we recommend wearing repellent. Anything that's an EPA-registered repellent is the best, and that just means that the the chemical itself has been rigorously tested for not only its safety but also its efficacy. So that means if you use that repellent, it should be effective and also safe for the people using it. We always recommend following label instructions for every product. And essentially, you want to find one that you can use on your exposed skin, or you can use it usually on top of your clothing. And then there's also permethrin. I don't know if a lot of people are familiar with that substance, but it's another great tool that you can use to embed your clothing. So this is one that does not go directly on your skin, but you can spray it on your clothing or even your gear or your shoes before you go out into the woods. It needs to have time to dry. So I usually try and do it the day before. And then when you wear your clothing, it's embedded with an insecticide that, or an acaricide really, that can kill the ticks upon contact. So if any tick does crawl on you, the permethrin will kill it. So those are some important things you can do when you're getting ready to recreate. During your time outdoors, we really just recommend avoidance. So again, ticks really love brushy, grassy areas. So it's ideal if you can stay on a trail where you're not rubbing up against the vegetation. And then, of course, after you're recreating and you come home, we recommend, or even during, you can do tick checks. So some people like to do tick checks, sort of along the way and also at home. But certainly, at the very least, do it when you get back home. Check your body, sort of from head to toe really thoroughly. If you can, take a shower within a couple hours of being outdoors. And that in itself is just another way to help you do a thorough tick check, and it can sometimes wash ticks off of you if they're trying to crawl around. And then you can also do things like throw your clothing in the dryer. So if you happen to have a tick on your clothing, if you take your clothes and throw them directly into the dryer when you get home and turn it on high for 10 minutes, that can kill the tick because they're very sensitive to high heat and desiccation. So that can take care of any remaining ticks that are sort of hiding on your clothing. And we also recommend checking, family, friends, children, and dogs as well, or pets that were with you. You can also consult, your veterinarian to make sure you're using any, an appropriate tick prevention medication on any animals or pets that go outside and also come inside, because they can bring ticks into your home. So that was a lot, but there's a lot of things you can do to prevent tick bites, and then if you happen to get a tick bite, to make sure it's removed as quickly as possible.
Where can they get the repellents? Can they find that in any store, or is there a special place they have to go get the repellent?
Yeah, they're widely available. So there's a lot of different brands that you can look for, and they should be available pretty much at any sort of general store, outdoor store. So, a lot of camping stores or outdoor stores should have anything you need, especially even drugstores can have some. And again, if you just check the label quickly, it should be an EPA-registered product. But common, some of the common chemicals are DEET. I think a lot of people are familiar with DEET. That one is still very effective. It's still widely available, and we recommend its use. There's a few others that are also really effective, equally as effective as DEET. And some of them, if people are wanting something that's a more botanical, developed chemical, there are some options there as well. There's something called oil of lemon eucalyptus that's pretty effective. And there's a few others, sort of botanically derived chemicals that are effective. So there's several options. You can pick the one that works best for you. A lot of them, the primary concerns for health are just, don't get it in your eyes or your mouth. If you're applying repellents on your children, make sure you do it yourself. Don't let small children do it themselves, and try and avoid spraying their hands or their face. A lot of kids will put their hands in their mouth without thinking about it. So just a few things to keep in mind when you're applying repellents. But all those EPA-registered repellents are safe and effective, and a really important tool for bite prevention.
Have you seen the tick population grow every year here in Wisconsin?
Yeah, so the population of deer ticks over the last few decades has spread. So the deer tick used to be really isolated to the northwestern part of Wisconsin a few decades ago, and steadily over time it really has spread to almost every part of the state. In fact, probably there's only a handful of counties in Wisconsin where we haven't officially documented the tick, but we're certain it's pretty much everywhere in the state. So now it's been moving, into the southern and southeastern portions of the state. So the risk of getting a tick bite from a deer tick is pretty much in any county in Wisconsin, but there are likely higher populations in the northwestern parts of the state because of the habitat. So again, these ticks really love wooded habitats, and so just because of the landscape in Wisconsin, we see the highest number of ticks in that area. But from year to year recently, there may be some fluctuations. Again, a lot of it is dependent on some weather, and a lot of it is also dependent on their host populations. So the mammals and birds and their populations as well, if they fluctuate, they can certainly impact the tick populations. But for the most part, it's over time, the general trend is that the ticks have just been spreading throughout the state, so that now they're no longer isolated to just certain portions of the state. They really occur everywhere.
Sure. What's the best advice you can give somebody about ticks?
To just take precautions from tick bites. That's certainly an important one. And there's pretty easy things that you can do. Sometimes I think they feel like they're, a lot of work, but especially if you're just, you don't have to do all of them every time you go out, but just, make sure you have some repellent. Keep away from the vegetation if you can, and do your tick checks when you get home. It's helpful, to travel with tweezers and just be aware of the risk so that you're keeping an eye out for ticks on your body. And then again, if you do develop any symptoms, go see your doctor right away. Most of the tick-borne diseases are effectively treated with antibiotics. So it's important to be diagnosed early and get that treated, get the treatment started right away so that you can fully recover.
Well, Rebecca, that was a lot of information. Where can somebody go to learn more?
We recommend people visit our website at the Department of Health Services. It's www.dhs.wisconsin, and that's spelled out, .gov/tickborne. You can also follow the Wisconsin DHS Facebook page and even Twitter, and on occasion, especially this time of year, we try and put out some, helpful hints on awareness and bite prevention. So those are great resources for getting more information. And then if people are more interested in ticks and tick bites and tick-borne diseases in general around the United States, they can always check out the CDC's websites. They have a lot of useful information as well on not only tick-borne diseases that occur in Wisconsin, but around the country as well. And that's also important for people who travel outside of the state. We unfortunately aren't the only state that has tick-borne diseases, and so a lot of other states in the U.S. are battling a lot of the same issues that we are here.
Well, Rebecca, this has been a great interview. I think you've taught us a lot, and it's tick season, so we need to be ready. We need to be prepared, and I think you really gave us a lot of great information so that we can be safe and have a great summer.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope people are enjoying the spring, and hopefully it'll warm up here even more soon, and we can get out and enjoy the outdoors and just make sure to play it safe and make sure you're preventing those tick bites.
Well, Rebecca, thank you for joining me on this week's podcast.
Thank you. You're very welcome, and I appreciate the opportunity.
I really hope you enjoyed this interview. I think Rebecca gave us a lot of great information, and I know that there's a lot that I learned and a lot that I'm going to be prepared for this summer. I want to thank Rebecca for taking the time to sit down with me and talk with me about ticks and give you more information about ticks. And I think it's important that not only we enjoy the outdoors, but we also keep ourselves educated about what's going on here in Wisconsin. And if you want to learn more, I'm going to have links to the Wisconsin Department of Health Services in the show notes so you can read up on some of the things that Rebecca talked about. Thanks again for joining me on this week's podcast. I am your host, Jason, and I will talk to you again next week. Thanks for listening to the Wisconsin's Outdoor Explorer podcast. For more great information about being an outdoor explorer, visit our website at wisconsinsoutdoorexplorer.com. Be sure to check out the blog page and follow us on social media. And don't forget to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.